This is day 63 in my 6-mark challenge for AQA GCSE Science. In the run-up to the exams, I'll be posting new 6-mark questions each Monday, Wednesday and Friday, so you can practice how to answer them. You can find a link in the description below to each week's questions and also access all of the videos in the playlist. Before we crack on with answering the question, don't forget, AQA GCSE Science markers are not assessing your use of paragraphs. Your ideas need to be presented in a logical order, but there aren't any marks for full sentences. I would really strongly encourage you to use bullet points or numbered lists where appropriate. Either of these is great for a method question like this, because they help you to lay out your ideas in a more logical order, and that's going to make it easier for the examiner to mark it. So if you haven't already done it, pause the video and give yourself 6 minutes on the clock to try and write a method for this practical. Whenever you plan an investigation where we're trying to find out what the relationship is between two things, rather than just say a synthesis practical where we're making a pure dry salt, it's a really good idea to start by explicitly calling out what your 3 different types of variables are. And this is going to make sure that you include them in your method and you can get credit for them. So in this investigation, the thing that I'm changing is the surface of this ramp. And we call the variable that I am changing the independent variable. And so that's going to be changed at each time we do the experiment. And then the whole point of the experiment is to see, well, what impact does that have on the dependent variable? So here, this is the acceleration of the toy train. So the dependent variable is the thing that I am measuring. And in this instance, it's quite hard to measure acceleration directly. So I'm going to need to measure speed and time as well. So I'm going to use some light gates. And then I also want to think about my control variables. So those are things that I'm going to keep absolutely the same as I go throughout my investigation. Because if I didn't, I wouldn't get valid data. When you were in primary school, you probably talked about it being not a fair test. So the idea is that if I didn't control these control variables, they would also affect the acceleration, and then I wouldn't know whether it was the surface of the ramp that was having an impact or not. So here I'm going to want to control the height of the ramp, because of course if that ramp was steeper, the car would accelerate more, or the train would accelerate more, but also the starting position on that ramp, and finally the weight of that train. So as I've said, I would definitely be laying out this method as either bullet points or as a numbered list, because it's going to make it much easier for your marker to follow and to make sure you're being nice and logical. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to cover that ramp with our first surface. So you might name a particular material or just say material 1, that will be fine. And then we need to position that ramp so that it's not going to move. So we might say have some blocks that we're going to put it on, or we might use a ruler to measure a certain height, but we need to make sure that if anything happens, if we knock it over, we can always put it back in the same position. And then we're going to place the train at a set position on that ramp. So we're always releasing it from the same height. So then I'm going to have my light gate 1 metre further down the ramp. Now the fact that it's exactly 1 metre is not the important thing. The important thing is that I've identified a distance I want it to be. So the train is always going from the same position and it's always got the same distance to travel before it gets to that light gate. So I'm going to release the train and I'm also going to start the stopwatch. And I'm going to stop the stopwatch as the train passes through the light gate. So in order to work out acceleration, I'm going to need a start velocity and end velocity, and I need to know the time it took that change to happen. So this is the time that it's taken for the train to get from its starting position down to the light gate. So I'm going to use the time from the light gate, so that will tell me how long did it take for the train to pass through the light beam, the time from that light gate, and the length of the train to determine the speed of the train or the velocity of the train. So I can then say acceleration is final velocity minus initial velocity divided by time. So that initial velocity is 0 because the train was stationary at the start of the experiment. And then the final velocity, I'm going to do the length of the train divided by the time it took it to break the light gate, and that will tell me how quickly it was moving as it passed through the light gate. And then the time is from my stopwatch. And then I'm going to repeat the experiment using different materials. So that's the point where I change my independent variable and see how has my dependent variable altered. So in terms of things that you're going to need to do in order to get your marks, firstly, we've got to talk about covering the surface of the ramp with a material. because otherwise we're not having any control over our independent variable. And then likewise at the end, we're going to need to actually repeat it using a different material. So those two together cover my independent variable. Then we're going to need to talk about doing this calculation to actually work out the acceleration. We're also going to need to be releasing the train and starting the stopwatch and stopping the stopwatch, and using that information to determine the speed. And then we also need to talk about how we're going to control some control variables. So for instance, here we've talked about the height of that ramp, that will be a control variable. Or you could also have got the same credit for talking about the train being at a set position. Obviously we do need to do both of those, but often the exam board are just giving you credit for having identified one of the control variables. I'll be back again on Monday for day 64 of the 6 mark challenge. Don't forget you can find a link in the description below to all of this week's questions and also the playlist containing all of the videos in the series so far. Thanks very much for watching, and I hope to see you again on Monday for day 64 of my 6 mark challenge. If you did find this video useful, then don't forget to like and subscribe for more GCSE Science revision videos coming soon.